In 1861, when the drums of the American Civil War began to thunder across the South, there was a place along the Yazoo River in Mississippi called Cane Hollow Plantation. From afar, it looked like a picture of peace: whitewashed houses, straight wooden fences, endless green sugarcane fields waving in the sun. But the closer one came, the picture changed color. That lush green was watered not by rain alone, but by sweat, tears, and blood. At the center of Cane Hollow stood an old blacksmith's forge. Its walls were stained with soot, its wooden door always ajar, letting smoke drift out like restless souls. Inside, the clang of hammer on iron rang steady, sharp as a war drum. The man at the anvil was Isaiah Turner, a powerful black man with shoulders broad as stable doors, arms darkened by years of fire and smoke. Isaiah was known as Crasher the Master's Smith. By day he shoed horses, fixed wagons, mended locks. By night, when the fire dimmed, he kept working. Only then his hammer no longer struck horseshoes, it struck hope. In the glow of the forge, his eyes carried a strange light. With every blow, he muttered the same words. Not just iron, a key. To anyone listening, it sounded like nonsense. But to Isaiah, it was an oath. Cane Hollow was ruled by Colonel Rupert Gaines, a former Confederate officer who clung to his rusted notion of honor. On paper, the enslaved had been renamed workers. In truth, nothing had changed. The whip still cracked, chains still clinked, and the overseers still prowled with eyes like knives. Isaiah was both an asset and a danger. The master trusted his skill, but distrusted his gaze, eyes that never bent long enough. One overseer once joked, "If looks could kill, Turner would have filled the graveyard by now." What they didn't know was that Isaiah forged more than tools. In a shadowed corner of the forge, he hid small scraps of iron, handsaws, hooks, slender bars shaped into keys. To an overseer, they looked like useless junk, but in Isaiah's hands, they were escape routes. By day, the forge rang with the clamor of work. By night, long after the others returned to their quarters, a faint clink, clink, clink could still be heard. Some teased, "Isaiah loves his hammer more than a wife." Others answered bitterly, "His wife was sold last year. Now the fire's all he has." Laughter followed, hollow but necessary, masking pain too deep for words. In that pain, Isaiah forged something new: resolve. He vowed no more children would be sold as his were, no more wives torn screaming from their husbands. Each strike of his hammer became a promise that could never be withdrawn. One stifling night, Naomi Clark, a thin woman with eyes bright as fire, stepped into the forge. She spotted the hidden hooks in the corner and smirked. "Making extras to keep the horses tied tighter?" Isaiah struck once more before answering. "No, to keep freedom tied tighter." Naomi's smile widened into a quiet laugh. "Then I'll be the first to test it." From that night on, Isaiah's forge was no longer just a place for iron. It became the beating heart of an unnamed departure. Outside, the wind hissed through the cane fields like the crack of a whip. Inside, the hammer beat grew faster, heavier, like a drum calling men to rise. Cane Hollow itself seemed to sense that something was forming. That night after the fire died, Isaiah remained seated by the anvil. He knew his hammer had become more than a tool. It was a vow. And to keep that vow, he needed companions. The story from here would no longer be only about fire and chains. It would be about people, souls pushed to the breaking point, yet still able to smile, still able to hope. And one by one, they would begin to step forward. The next day, the sun at Cane Hollow Plantation rose early and blazed as if it meant to melt the entire cane field. Heat shimmered up from the black earth, making the air waver like fire. The people were driven out before dawn, machetes in hand, backs bent as if carrying the whole sky. Whip cracks split the morning air, mingling with the hoarse shouts of overseers, composing the same death march melody that ruled their lives. In that world, no one dared lift their head for more than a second. A glance in the wrong place could cost blood. Yet a few eyes still burned bright, the eyes of those who refused to live like weeds. Naomi Clark was one of them. She had borne 2 children. One was sold away at 6 years old, the other torn from her arms on a rain-soaked morning. Naomi told the story often, how she screamed until her throat split, but the lash drowned out her voice. Now she had no tears left, only eyes that glowed like embers, refusing to die. Beside her worked Jonas Wright, not yet 20, quick as a squirrel. His small frame and boyish face made him nearly invisible, which the overseers found useful for errands. But that invisibility was his greatest gift. Jonas knew which overseer nodded off drunk, which guard lingered too long at the bottle, and where the fence posts had rotted thin. The others whispered, "If Jonas says there's a way through, then there is." And then there was Reverend Elijah Moore, an old, stooped preacher with little strength left in his arms, but a well of scripture still in his lungs. By day, overseers mocked him, sneering, "Your prayers won't cut Cain." But at night, when fatigue pressed heavy and despair threatened, Elijah's voice rose in a ragged baritone. "The Israelites crossed the Red Sea. We too shall cross." His words fell like medicine, keeping hearts from collapse. Life under Cain Hollow's lash was a prison in all but name. Meals were hard cornbread that could break teeth, broth thin as dishwater. Clothes were rags, winter froze, summer scorched. The sick rarely lasted more than weeks. Medicine meant only prayer. Overseers, meanwhile, never lacked for whiskey. Yet in that cruelty, people still struck sparks of light. At night, in pitch-black quarters, they told jokes. Laughter rose, muffled and broken, but laughter all the same. One mimicked the mistress's shrill scolding, and the hut erupted. Another imitated overseer Reuben's long, slobbering yawns, and even the children giggled until they gasped. No laughter could break chains, but for a few minutes it broke fear. Isaiah Turner sat quiet in his corner, watching children collapse asleep in their mother's arms. He thought of his own boy, sold off 2 years past. Each time the memory surfaced, his hands clenched white. Then he forced breath through his chest and told himself, "Pain is not fed with tears. Pain must be fed with iron." Naomi would drift near, whispering, "Keep forging, Isaiah." "I'll keep the silence." Jonas slipped him news. "Last night the guards changed shifts 15 minutes late." That's a window. Elijah laid a trembling hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "Every hammer strike is a prayer spoken in steel." 3 different souls, a grieving mother, a restless youth, a weary preacher, became his closest allies. They hadn't chosen each other. The chains had chosen for them, binding them into one circle. In the glow of the forge fire, Isaiah looked at them and nodded. He knew the smithy needed more than his arms. It needed hearts strong enough to carry the flame. And now he had found them. The next morning, the overseers still bellowed, the whips still cracked, the cane still drank sweat. But something had shifted in the eyes of the people. No one spoke it aloud, but all could feel it. The iron chains had begun to crack, just a hairline fracture. And once iron splits, only a few more blows are needed before it shatters to dust. By day, the forge of Cain Hollow rang with hammer and smoke, the place where Isaiah Turner was paraded as a living tool. Overseers bragged that they owned the finest blacksmith in the county, a man who could fix anything, from the hinges of an iron gate to the broken handle of a whip. But they never guessed that inside that soot-choked forge, Isaiah was crafting the very thing they feared most, tools to break chains. When night fell and the plantation sank into uneasy silence, Isaiah returned to his anvil. The red glow of the fire lit his face, sweat dripping into the coal dust. Clang, clang, clang. The hammer fell steady like a heartbeat. Each strike was more than labor. It was a vow. In a dark corner, hidden beneath cooled ash, lay a cache of illegal iron, thin saw blades, hooks, sharpened nails, and above all, crude keys. To an overseer's eye, they were scrap. To the desperate, they were life itself. Naomi often slipped in quietly, handing him scraps of cloth to wrap the metal and hide it. She smirked. "People hide gold in chests?" "You hide freedom in the ashes." Isaiah said nothing, hammer still rising and falling. But the fire in his eyes as he glanced at the hidden tools told Naomi enough. They were more precious than gold. Jonas lent his cunning, By day he noted which overseer carried which key, which locks guarded which gates. By night he scratched rough maps in the dirt showing Isaiah. He would joke, "If you weren't a blacksmith, you'd make a fine locksmith. I swear, no lock can beat you." Elijah offered no craft but his voice. Each time the hammer rang, he murmured scripture. "He has broken the chains. He has led his children out of prison." Isaiah allowed himself a brief smile. "I don't know if the Lord uses a hammer like mine, but I think he likes the sound." One evening, Overseer Reuben barged in, suspicion in his eye. Sparks flew as Isaiah struck iron. "Why are you still working?" Reuben barked. Isaiah lifted a half-shaped horseshoe, calm as stone. "You asked for 10. I've only made 9. I'd rather not be called lazy at dawn." Reuben spat tobacco on the floor and stalked away. Outside, Naomi's heart pounded in her chest, but Isaiah never missed a beat, hammer falling in perfect rhythm. Later, Naomi whispered, "If they catch you, what then?" Isaiah set the hammer down, voice low but firm. "Then I die, but I'd rather die with a hammer in my hand than with my head bowed." That answer spread like wildfire through the quarters. Turner forges more than iron, he forges hope. And hope, once sparked, spread faster than flame. Soon the forge became a gathering place. Someone smuggled in a scrap of steel. Another brought a handful of corn to feed Isaiah's strength. Children sat wide-eyed, thinking he was making toys. They never knew he was shaping keys to make their parents vanish into freedom. One evening, Isaiah handed Naomi a small iron hook, smooth to her grip. "Keep this," he said. "One day it will open the door you thought was shut forever." Naomi's hands shook, then she laughed softly. "I just hope it opens the mouth of that overseer who eats more than he talks." For the first time, Isaiah chuckled aloud. In the darkness, their laughter rang like sparks. The forge was no longer the master's domain. It had become the hidden heart of a journey. Every ember was a promise. Every strike was preparation. And to those who gathered around him, Isaiah Turner was no longer just the blacksmith. He was the smith of freedom. In the flickering light of an oil lamp, the abandoned corn crib at the edge of Cane Hollow Plantation became something else entirely, a secret congress of chained souls. By day, it was nothing but a storehouse for dried corn, alive with scurrying rats. By night, when the wind slipped through the cracked boards with a haunted creak, it held 100 people seated in a circle, whispering plans so daring their very thoughts made hearts pound. Isaiah Turner stood at the center. There was no podium, no raised chair, only a crossbeam he leaned against, a scrap of iron in his calloused hand, like a commander's staff. His voice was low but steady. "We have forged the tools. But tools will not open chains if the heart lacks courage. Tonight we pass this fire into every hand." Naomi Clark stepped forward, cradling the youngest child of the quarters. The baby nursed and slept, unaware its mother was plotting defiance. Naomi's voice carried in the hush. "Half my children were sold. I will not let the other half grow under the whip. If you agree, lift your heads." Every head in the circle rose. Not one flinched. Jonas Wright dragged forward a rough plank, charcoal lines scrawled into a crude map. "This is Cane Hollow. 3 exits: the northern woods, the western swamp, and the Yazoo River Trail. The guards change shifts at midnight. 15 minutes. That's our crack of light." Whispers rippled, faces pale. 100 people crossing forest and water under rifles sounded like a cruel joke. Reverend Elijah placed a trembling hand on a shoulder and rumbled, "The Israelites stood before the Red Sea. If God split waters for them, he will open a way for us. But first we must step forward." A quiet chorus of "Amen" rose, not loud, but firm as hammer on anvil. Isaiah began dividing them, his gestures sharp, decisive, like a general at war. First group, led by Jonas, would break chains and pick locks. Second group, under Naomi, would hush the children, masking cries with songs and whispered prayers. Third group, Isaiah at the front, would strike the fences with the forged tools. Elijah would walk in the center, the spiritual lantern. A young woman asked, voice trembling, "And if we're caught?" Naomi answered before Isaiah could, "Then we die. But we die walking toward freedom, not rotting in chains. Her words froze the room until Jonas chuckled. At least we won't have to hear that overseer snore anymore. Laughter broke out, strained, muffled, but enough to loosen fear's grip. Elijah lifted his hands, whispering a verse. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Heads nodded. Fire spread silently through weary hearts. They argued every detail. How to muffle children's cries. Naomi pressed soft cornbread into tiny hands. Who would carry water, each person hiding a gourd beneath rags? What signal to use? 3 knocks from Isaiah's iron rod. How to shake off dogs, scattering black pepper along the trail. When all was set, Isaiah lifted his iron scrap and tapped it 3 times against the beam. From tonight, we are no longer trembling slaves. We are a people, and a people does not turn back. The walls seemed to vibrate with the whisper that rolled around the circle. No turning back. They left in small clusters, the corn crib empty once more. Yet the air remained warm, as if an invisible fire still burned. Isaiah was last. He blew out the oil lamp. Darkness rushed in, but his eyes still shone. He knew this meeting was more than strategy. It was an oath, and an oath once forged in fire and blood does not break. By day, Cane Hollow rang with the crack of whips. By night, the plantations still echoed, this time with the hammer of Isaiah Turner. After the failed escape, the air in the quarters was heavier than smoke. Everyone had seen the price: blood on the posts, flesh torn by lashes, 3 bodies swaying as warnings. Overseers called it discipline. The people knew it was sacrifice. Isaiah gathered Naomi, Jonas, and Reverend Elijah in the shadow of the forge. His hands were raw, split open from striking iron long past exhaustion. The blood on his palms gleamed like molten steel. We failed, he said, his voice like gravel, but failure is the anvil. From this anvil, we shaped the next blade. Naomi's face was pale, streaked with ash. She still heard the screams. We sent them into the wolf's mouth, she whispered. Isaiah shook his head slowly. No, they proved the gate splinters. They showed us chains can give. Jonas, back flayed raw, limped in. He set Naomi's frayed headscarf in her hands. His voice cracked. I'm alive to return it. That means the door didn't close. Yet. Naomi clutched it to her chest and wept, not only for loss but for the shred of hope still clinging. Reverend Elijah, hunched in the corner, recited through a ruined throat. Israel stumbled many times before the waters parted. This was only the first fall. The sea will open. A bitter laugh rose from a voice in the dark. Or maybe our Red Sea is just a gallows pit. The quarters trembled with strangled chuckles, harsh, cracked, yet strangely defiant. Even humor, black as tar, was a weapon against despair. Isaiah wiped sweat and blood from his brow. He lifted the hammer again, striking sparks into the darkness. Each strike was a vow, a promise hammered into iron. Next time, he rumbled, it will not be 8. Next time, it will be all of us. The firelight flickered across hollow faces, turning their eyes into mirrors of flame. Fear was still there, but beneath it lived something new, resolve hardened by loss. The overseers thought the lash had crushed them, but the lash had only tempered the steel. The first attempt had broken, yes, but like a cracked chain on the forge, everyone could hear it. 1 more blow, 2 more blows, and it would shatter. And in that midnight silence, the people of Cane Hollow began to believe, not only in Isaiah's hammer, but in their own. After the failed attempt, the forge at Cane Hollow burned hotter than ever. Each strike of Isaiah Turner's hammer rang like a war drum, and words spread through the quarters. If Turner hasn't given up, neither will we. The 100 souls gathered once more in the corn crib, their faces still carved with fear, but stripped of despair. Isaiah stood tall in the circle, a piece of iron rod in his calloused hand like a commander's staff. His voice was low but unwavering. We have no ground left to retreat to. If we flee in small groups, they'll drag us back one by one. Next time, we go together. All 100. A ripple of gas broke out. 100. The idea sounded both impossible and divine. Naomi's brows drew tight. 8 nearly died trying. You would lead 100. Isaiah's eyes glowed like embers. Yes, if one drop of blood can shake them, then a river will drown their fear. No more hiding, no more creeping in shadows. We will march like an army. Jonas, still raw from the lash, smirked despite the pain. At least I won't be running alone this time. With 100 backs in front of me, maybe the whip won't find mine. The quarters burst into strangled laughter. Harsh, trembling, but it lightened the air. Isaiah unrolled a strip of coarse cloth and sketched with charcoal. North, thick forest tangled with briars. West, the Yazoo swamp, where the earth swallowed men like quicksand. East, the road to town, crawling with guards. South, the river path, longer but possible. The plan, unlockers. Jonas would lead, using Isaiah's forged saws and keys. Guardians. Naomi would oversee the children and women, cloaking cries with hymns. Vanguard. Isaiah himself would wield hammer and axe, tearing fences, drawing fire. Reverend Elijah would stay at the heart, the spirit of the column, because no exodus survives without faith. Elijah raised his broken voice. God will part the waters, but we must step first. Naomi added firmly, if one falls, another steps forward. We leave no one behind. And the circle roared back. No one behind. In the days that followed, preparations became ritual. Food was hidden in rags, gourds filled with water, ropes braided from hemp. Women taught the children silence through games. Who can stay quiet longest? A child's giggle earned a mock punishment of hugs, turning fear into play. Isaiah labored ceaselessly, forging saws, sharpening broken hose into blades, hammering nails into crude daggers. His back screamed with pain, his palms split until they bled, but he never stopped. Naomi brought cornbread, scolding, if you starve yourself, freedom will come to corpses. Isaiah chewed without looking up, eyes fixed on glowing steel. Corpses are certain if the chains hold. Bread feeds today, iron frees forever. The day was chosen, a week when guards were called to town, leaving Cane Hollow thinly watched. A moonless night, the west wind high, insects loud enough to cover footsteps. At the final gathering, Isaiah's gaze swept the 100. His voice cut through the smoky air. This is not a trial. This is the road itself. If we go, we may die. If we stay, we will surely die in chains. Which do you choose? A boy of 12 rose, voice trembling but clear. I choose to go. I will not grow up like my father. Silence swallowed the room. Then one by one, heads lifted, nodding. Reverend Elijah raised both hands, the rasp in his throat booming like thunder. Then we are no longer slaves. We are a people, walking into freedom. Naomi turned to Isaiah, her eyes fierce with pride and dread. Turner, you are not only forging iron, you are forging our hearts. Isaiah said nothing, but his lips pressed tight, his gaze burning. In his chest, he knew. The fire was no longer his alone. It belonged to every one of the 100 souls. And the night of their exodus was nearly upon them. The final day at Cane Hollow Plantation arrived beneath a suffocating silence. Outwardly, life carried on. Bent backs in the cane fields. Overseers pacing with whips coiled like serpents. Orders barked as usual. But beneath it, something pulsed. In every bowed head there flickered a hidden light, a restrained blaze like embers glowing under ash. Naomi Clark cut cane with trembling hands. Not from fear, but from memory. The image of her child torn from her arms on this very soil. She inhaled sharply, whispering under her breath, "Tonight I pay your debt." Jonas Wright tried to smother the weight with humor. Carrying a bundle, sweat pouring down his back, he muttered, "Figures God would pick the hottest day of the year for us to run. Maybe he just wants the overseer to sweat a little before he dies." Someone nearby stifled a laugh, a cracked sound that still lightened the load in their chest. Inside the quarters, Reverend Elijah stayed with the children, too frail to work the fields. His voice rasped but steady. He recited scripture. The Israelites ate their last meal in bondage before they departed. Tonight, so do we. This is the last meal of shame. The children did not fully understand, but they hushed and stared wide-eyed, sensing the gravity in his tone. At the forge, Isaiah Turner spent his final hours not making new tools. Those were already hidden and ready, but keeping rhythm. Light taps of his hammer against the anvil, like a heartbeat he refused to let falter. He stared at the saws, the crude keys, the rough blades. Against rifles and whips, they looked pitiful. Yet Isaiah believed they carried more than iron. They carried faith. When the sun sank, the quarters filled with a strange stillness. Supper was the same, hard cornbread, thin broth, but each bite was deliberate, as though marking the end of an era. Naomi pressed a piece of bread into her daughter's hands. Eat, child. After tonight, you'll never have to swallow this again. Overseer Reuben barged in, lashing his whip against the dirt. Eat quick, you've got work tomorrow. He sneered, oblivious that tomorrow held no work left for him. Someone whispered, if he knew, he'd eat slower than us. Stifled chuckles rippled, eyes glinting with fire. After the meal preparations began, Naomi handed out scraps of bread wrapped in cloth. Jonas checked the ropes, the saws, the smuggled knives. Elijah gathered them, his voice resonant despite age. Tonight we do more than leave this place. Tonight we leave the darkness itself. Isaiah rose, gaze sweeping the circle. His voice thundered with conviction. We may fall, we may die, but if we die moving toward freedom, not kneeling in chains. To stay is to live in the whip. To go is to live or die as human beings. Silence held for a heartbeat. Then an old woman, hair silvered with years, stood. I go. I will not die on this cursed ground. A young man followed. I go. My son will not grow up in irons. Voices surged, swelling into one chorus. Go, go, go. Naomi stepped close to Isaiah, whispering, you forged the tools, Turner, but you forged us too. Tonight, you lead us out. Isaiah said nothing, only nodded, eyes burning like the forge he'd lived beside. He knew the last day in bondage had passed, and when the moon rose, the chains would rise with it, only to break. As the moon climbed high, its silver glow spilled across the scorched cane fields, transforming Cane Hollow Plantation into something unfamiliar. The usual sounds of the night, whip cracks, overseers' curses, were gone. Only the wind moved through the rotting fence posts, whispering like a voice in the dark. Go! Your time has come. 100 souls, young and old, pressed together inside the corn crib. No one dared to breathe too loudly, as if the slightest noise could shatter the fragile dream taking shape. Reverend Elijah sat at the center, voice hoarse but steady as he offered a crooked prayer. Lord, if you will not part the Red Sea, then at least keep Pharaoh asleep one more hour. A few stifled laughs rippled through the crowd, and strangely that laughter gave them strength. Isaiah Turner rose. In his hands were the crude tools he had forged, saws, hooks, knives, and rough iron keys. They gleamed with no polish, yet in each palm they landed, they were clutched like sacred relics. This is not just iron, Isaiah said, his voice firm as a hammer striking steel. These are keys, but they will only unlock chains if your hearts are brave enough. Naomi cradled her daughter, pressing a finger to the child's lips. The silence game begins now, she whispered. The little girl blinked, nodded, and buried her face in her mother's neck. Around the room, other children were hushed with soft cornbread, their small bellies filled, their cries smothered. Jonas moved quickly along the edges, eyes sharp. 15 minutes, remember? The guards change when the moon rests against the oak. That's when they are at their laziest. The door creaked open. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting cane. 100 bare feet touched the grass, moving in a line, shadows gliding low to the ground. Each rustle of leaves rang in their ears like thunder, yet still they advanced. At the southern fence, Jonas slipped out his saw. The rasping scrape filled the silence, sweat pouring down his temples though the night was cool. Naomi bent low to calm a trembling boy. Don't be afraid. It's just hide and seek. And this time, we'll win. The last plank gave way. Isaiah lifted his hand. Go. One by one they passed through. Elders leaning on shoulders, children carried tight against chests, the strongest bearing knives and axes. Every silhouette slipping through the gap felt like a heartbeat skipping. And still, no dogs, no torches. Overseers slumbered on, blind to the exodus unfolding. An old woman, her hair white as ash, whispered in awe, "The Lord truly has lulled Pharaoh to sleep." Jonas bit his lip to keep from laughing aloud. When the final soul was across, Isaiah paused, glancing back at Cane Hollow. The quarters lay in darkness, the forge silent, a cold monument to years of chains. "Goodbye," he murmured, "and may we never meet again." They set out southward, following the dirt road along the river. The night wind struck their faces, laced with a strange scent. Freedom. "Mama, where are we going?" a child whispered. Naomi answered softly, "To a place where no whip waits." Fear still clung to them, but it was wrapped in something thicker. Courage. They knew, if they survived this night, the world would never be the same. At the rear, Reverend Elijah tapped his cane against the ground, his voice rough but carrying, a hymn rising faintly into the night. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." The tune drifted outward, fragile yet steady, binding them like a spell. Isaiah heard it, tightened his jaw, and fixed his eyes forward. There was no turning back now. At first it seemed as though the plan had worked. 100 souls had slipped through the southern fence, moving along the dirt road that led toward the Yazoo River. The wind pressed hard against their faces, the moon veiled by clouds, the path black as ink. Their footsteps blended into the night breeze, and for a brief, impossible moment, each heart whispered the same thought. We've made it. We're free. But freedom, as Isaiah Turner had warned, never traveled alone. It always dragged an enemy in its wake. The first howl split the night, then another. Soon an entire pack of hounds shrieked into the darkness, their cries carrying like trumpets from hell. Torches flared in the distance, overseers bellowing, "They've run! After them!" Panic surged. Children wailed, mothers trembled, men clenched crude knives and clubs. Isaiah lifted his arm, voice hard as steel. "Do not stop! Keep moving. Anyone with a blade, stand and cover the rear." Naomi crushed her daughter to her chest, whispering fiercely, "Hush now. This is only a game of hide and seek, and tonight we win." The child pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, silent but wide-eyed. Jonas sprinted ahead, clearing the path. He glanced back, panting. "They've got horses. If we don't move faster, they'll surround us." Isaiah gritted his teeth. "We'll never outrun horses, but we can make them fall." He motioned for the strongest men. Together they dragged heavy branches into the road. Minutes later, the first wave of riders thundered forward, only to crash headlong into the trap. Horses stumbled, legs snapping, riders hurled, screaming into the dirt. One overseer scrambled up, whip raised, until Naomi leapt, driving her knife into his belly. She whispered coldly in his ear, "This is for my child." His blood darkened the earth. Gunfire cracked. A man collapsed, chest torn apart. The convoy froze in terror. Reverend Elijah's broken voice roared across the night. "Go on! Don't waste his blood! Move!" His cry lashed their hearts harder than any whip. They surged forward again. Jonas fought beside Isaiah, breath ragged. "At this pace, we'll all be dead before the river." Isaiah's eyes burned. "Then we change the plan. Some fight, the rest flee." 6 men peeled away, crouching behind an embankment. When the next patrol charged, the 6 rose like shadows, knives flashing, clubs smashing. Screams rang through the cane fields. They knew they would not survive, yet they shouted with their dying breath, "Run! Don't turn back!" Naomi shut her eyes against the sound, tears hot on her cheeks. Still she walked, clutching her daughter. The hounds came again. One lunged, seizing a boy in its jaws. Jonas spun, rage igniting, and plunged his knife into the beast's throat. Blood sprayed as the animal collapsed. Jonas hoisted the boy, trembling but alive. "They live! As long as we live!" he bellowed. That night became a nightmare stitched from screams, gunshots, and the wet crack of bone. But no one surrendered. Each time one fell, another lifted them. Each bullet only made the others run faster. Isaiah fought at the rear, hammer raised. An overseer charged, whip slicing the air. Isaiah swung, the iron striking bone with a sickening crunch. The man howled, crumpling into the dust. Isaiah did not look back. His eyes locked on the river, his heart hammering one word, Yasu. Then at last, the moon broke free of the clouds, casting silver across water. The river lay ahead, glimmering faintly like a road of salvation. Someone screamed with joy, "The river! The river's there!" But behind them the hoofbeats drew nearer, the baying louder, torches closer. Freedom shimmered within reach, yet death's hand clawed at their backs. They were only a few hundred steps away, steps that would decide whether Cane Hollow's story ended in chains or in fire. The Yazoo lay before them at last, but not as the dreamt ribbon of salvation, rather as a black, heaving expanse framed by sucking marsh. The air reeked of rot and stagnant blood, the mud clinging to their legs with the grip of a grave. Jonas gasped, chest burning. "Mr. Turner, this swamp is no crossing, it's a trap." Isaiah's eyes were flint in the moonlight. "Then we'll make the trap a bridge, and we'll cross it with our own bodies if we must." Naomi pulled her daughter close, whispering into her curls, "Don't look down, baby. Pretend it's just a game of splashing in mud." The child whimpered, but pressed her face into her mother's neck, trusting. Step by step, the 100 sank into the mire. Mud reached their knees, then thighs, pulling as though invisible hands clawed them down. An old woman slipped with a cry, mud swallowing her whole. Isaiah lunged, gripped her skeletal arm, and with a roar wrenched her free. She coughed, shaking, then rasped with fire in her eyes. "I'm still breathing. Keep moving." Behind them, the hounds bayed and hooves pounded. The swamp slowed pursuit, but it slowed them too. Jonas slipped, swallowed nearly to the chest. "Damnation! Is this what freedom costs?" A man hauled him up, and for one absurd second they both laughed, black mud dripping from their faces before stumbling on. Gunfire split the night. A woman cried out, collapsing, crimson spreading through the black mire. Naomi bit her lip until blood spilled, but she didn't stop. Beside her, Reverend Elijah lifted his staff skyward, his voice hoarse but steady. "Lord, if you will not lift our feet, then at least make this swamp drink its fill of blood and ask for no more." They pressed forward in a ragged line, strong shoulders carrying the weak, children perched on backs or in old cane baskets. One boy of 10 grinned through fear. "I'm riding a mud horse." Laughter, trembling and wet, rippled through the column. For a moment, even in horror, there was life. An overseer spurred his horse into the swamp. The beast screamed, flailed, and sank, dragging its rider down. His cries for help were cut short by the muck. A few fugitives paused, watching with mingled horror and grim satisfaction. Jonas muttered, "The swamp knows better than men. It chooses its meal." But the mire spared no one. A teenager slipped under, vanishing. Naomi shrieked. Isaiah plunged headfirst, hands groping in the sludge until he dragged the boy back up, both of them black as shadows. The boy gagged and coughed, alive. Isaiah clutched him, whispering harshly, "Die here and it means nothing. Live, and maybe my death one day will mean something." Onward they staggered. The moon sank lower, their strength with it. Then, through the mist, the silver shimmer of the Yazoo glimmered like a blade of hope. Someone cried out, "The river! The river's there!" A volley of shots cracked. Bullets hissed overhead. Men and women screamed, bodies falling, the swamp swallowing them whole. One man struck through the chest, bellowed with his last breath, "Keep going! Don't come back!" before sinking beneath the muck. Isaiah, bleeding, his back streaked with mud and crimson, roared, "Faster!" Not one soul dies before they see the water. The ground grew firmer beneath their feet. Elijah stumbled, and Jonas with Naomi hauled him upright. The old preacher wheezed a laugh. See it? We've crossed our Red Sea. Only ours was mud. His cackle was weak, but it lent them strength. Then sand crunched beneath their feet, the bank of the Yazoo. Women fell to their knees weeping. Children splashed at the edge with trembling hands. The river smelled of iron and fish, but to them it was sweeter than any cornbread. Isaiah raised his head. Moonlight glinted off the racing current. This isn't freedom yet, he murmured, but this is the border of it. Behind them torches flared and hounds bayed louder, but before them the river rushed on, wide and relentless, as though daring them. Cross me if you can. Would you like me to continue this arc with the crossing of the Yazoo itself, their most perilous trial? Or pause here and let this moment of almost freedom stand as its own cliffhanger? The banks of the Yazoo stretched wide and endless, the black waters churning fiercely beneath the fading moonlight. For many, just standing there was enough to make their knees buckle, breath ragged as if freedom itself were already in their lungs. But Isaiah Turner knew it was not finished. Freedom did not rest on this shore. It waited on the far side. "Build rafts," he barked, his voice sharp as a hammer strike. At once, the men rushed to fell rotting trees along the bank, binding them with hemp rope. Rough, makeshift rafts began to take shape, simple but as solid as their will. Naomi sank to her knees, clutching her daughter tightly. She whispered, "Listen to Mama. This is just a game of riding boats. We're going far away to where no one carries whips." The girl whimpered but nodded. Jonas, his back still raw with lashes, waded into the river to test the depth. The current slammed against him, icy, so strong it nearly swept him away. "This river wants to eat us alive," he hissed. But then he grinned, looking at Isaiah. "Then we'll eat it back." "I'm ready." When the first raft was shoved into the water, women and children climbed aboard, men standing with poles to guide it. Reverend Elijah remained on the bank, eyes lifted to the heavens, his hoarse voice praying, "Lord, if you gave us passage through the mud, grant us now a path through the water behind them." The sounds of hounds and pounding hooves drew nearer. Overseers raised their rifles, torchlight flickering across steel. A shout split the night. "Fire!" Bullets hissed through the air, splashing into the river. One man on a raft was struck in the chest, collapsing as his wife screamed and clutched his body. Isaiah roared, "Keep moving! Don't stop!" More rafts hit the water. The current seized them, tossing and spinning. Some fell overboard, swallowed by the river. Their cries rose, then were drowned by the rush of water. Still, the rafts pushed on, drifting closer to the far shore. Jonas clenched his teeth, bracing a pole with 3 others. "Push harder! If we don't, the river will drag us back." His hands shook, blood seeping down his back, but his eyes blazed. Naomi held her child close, eyes squeezed shut, lips murmuring prayers. The little girl dozed in her arms, unaware she floated between life and death. A bullet grazed Isaiah's ear, spinning him to his knees. He staggered, then shoved himself upright again. Hammer still in hand, he thrust it high and bellowed, "This is for the children we lost, for the souls chained in darkness. You may shoot at me, but you cannot shoot down freedom." His words carried across the water, louder than the gunfire. At last, the first raft scraped against sand. A cry broke out. "We made it!" Those who landed fell to their knees, kissing the ground, tears streaming down their faces. But dozens were still stranded on the far bank. Isaiah turned back, eyes burning like fire. He shouted, "Turn the rafts around!" "We leave no one," Jonas shouted back. "You'll be killed." "The bullets are thicker now." Isaiah snarled, "If I leave them, I've been dead already." So the rafts went back again. That night the Yazoo ran red with blood, but trip after trip survivors were ferried across. By the time the first light of dawn broke the horizon, nearly 80 souls had reached the far shore. They collapsed in exhaustion, clothes in tatters, but their eyes shone like flames. Isaiah, bleeding and broken, dropped heavily onto the sand. He looked at the river, then at his people. His breath came ragged, but a faint smile touched his lips. This, this is the greatest work of my life, not forged in iron, but in soul. The far bank of the Yazoo was no paradise. The ground was cold and wet, mud clinging up to their knees, and the night wind cut like a blade. But for the 80-odd souls who had survived, it was the first land they touched without an overseer's shout. Many collapsed to the sand, kissing the earth, some weeping like children. Naomi clutched her daughter tightly, trembling as she whispered, "Child, this is land without the whip." Remember its smell, Isaiah Turner did not weep. He dropped to the ground, chest heaving, his bloodied hand still gripping the hammer. He knew, crossing the river was only half the journey. True freedom lay further still. At dawn, Jonas spotted something unusual, a stone by the roadside carved with an arrow. He cried out, "Here it is!" A signal of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad, not a real railroad, but a secret network of houses, churches, and farms where abolitionists aided those fleeing bondage. That night, they were led into a cellar beneath a small church. Above, hymns still echoed, while below they were given bread, milk, and bandages. For the first time in months, they ate without an overseer watching. Jonas bit into soft bread and nearly sobbed. "My God, is this what freedom tastes like?" Someone nearby joked, "If the overseer knew, he'd force us back to corn cakes in the name of tradition." The cellar filled with muffled laughter, half joy, half tears. Naomi's wounds were tended by an elderly white woman, whose hands trembled as she said, "My daughter was taken from me years ago. Since then I swore, if I could save anyone, I would." Naomi gripped her hand and whispered, "You haven't just saved me. You've saved my bloodline." Reverend Elijah rose, leaning on his cane, his hoarse voice echoing through the cellar. "Brothers and sisters, this is not the destination. This is only the first station. We must go further, through more houses, across more fields, and with every step, we will remember those who fell." At midnight, they left the church, guided by a farmer on horseback. He carried sacks of corn to mass suspicion. "If anyone asks," he said, "you're my hired hands. And remember to smile foolishly," Jonas muttered. "Smiling foolish is my specialty." The group chuckled, though their hearts were heavy. The journey stretched for days. They walked, sometimes rode hidden in wagons, sometimes lay cramped in barn cellars. Each station was a story, a farm family hiding them in a wine cellar, serving sweet cider, a pastor unlocking his church at midnight so they could sleep upon the altar, a 10-year-old white girl slipping Naomi an apple, whispering, "For the baby, don't cry anymore." Naomi embraced the child, eyes brimming. Along the way, some collapsed from exhaustion, unable to continue. They were not abandoned. Others carried them on shoulders. Some fell ill but still managed to smile. "At least I'm sick on the road to freedom, not in a wooden pen." Isaiah marched at the front, eyes fixed north. He knew Ohio was the goal, a land without slavery. Yet he also knew the railroad was fraught with danger. One traitor's word could undo everything. One night, while hiding in a stable, hoofbeats and voices thundered at the door. They held their breath as patrolmen demanded entry. The farmer opened, calm. "Only horses here. Check if you must." The soldiers brought in torches, stepping dangerously close to their hiding place. Naomi's heart pounded. Her daughter's lips quivered toward a cry. She pressed her finger to the child's mouth. Just as the torchlight swung their way, a horse kicked hard, knocking over a water barrel. The soldiers cursed, distracted, then left. The farmer winked afterward. "My horses hate slavery too." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. At each stop, they lost more, some to illness, some to exhaustion, some to capture. Yet their spirits hardened. Jonas, though still aching from lashes, liked to joke, "If I fall, remember to say I was the fastest runner in the band." Naomi teased back, "Fast enough to be the first into the swamp, yes." Fatigue, wounds, and tears weighed on them. But still they moved, day after day, because ahead lay the north, because ahead still lay freedom. Each passing day, the group grew more like a river, slow, winding, but never stopping. From more than 100 souls at the start, now fewer than 80 remained. Loss piled upon loss, but their steps did not falter. The road to the north stretched endlessly, across forests, barren fields, and towns where white eyes fell on them like blades. They traveled by night, hid by day. The children were taught a strange game. Whoever sleeps the quietest during the day will get the biggest piece of bread at night. So they squeezed their eyes shut, bellies growling, but they stayed silent. Naomi Clark carried her daughter on her back. Whenever the child wheezed with fever, she held her tighter, whispering, "Sleep, my child. When you wake, you'll see freedom." The words were not only for her daughter, but for herself. Jonas Wright became the group's eyes. He scouted ahead, sometimes crawling close to the ground, sometimes climbing trees to watch. Once he nearly stumbled into a patrol. Quick-witted, he staggered out pretending to be drunk, slurring a ridiculous song. The soldiers laughed and moved on. When Jonas returned, he grimaced. "I swear my singing hurts worse than a whip, but it saved my hide." The group chuckled softly, even through exhaustion. Reverend Elijah grew weaker with each mile. His back bent lower, his breath shortened, but his prayers never faltered. "The Lord walks before us. If I fall, it is only so you may walk faster." He coughed violently after speaking, blood staining the corner of his mouth. Isaiah Turner had to support him, eyes filled with both pride and dread. One night they stopped at a small wooden house. The mistress of the home, an elderly white woman with silver hair, hid them in her wine cellar, bringing bread and water. When Naomi thanked her, she only shook her head. "I do this because I still have a conscience. Without it, I am no better than the ones who wield the whip." The next day, a boy in the group fell gravely ill, slipping into delirium. The others debated leaving him behind to save the many. Naomi clutched the child and wept. "No, we leave no one." Isaiah looked at her, then at the weary faces around him, and finally said, "We walk together, or not at all." And so they carried the boy on their shoulders for miles. The frail child became a symbol. If he could keep going, then so could the rest. The closer they drew to the north, the greater the danger. Rumors of escaped slaves spread fast. Bounty hunters lurked for reward. One night they were ambushed. Gunfire erupted. Chaos split the group. Isaiah swung his hammer in defense. Naomi stabbed with her small knife to shield a child. Jonas led survivors through tall reeds into the forest. When they regrouped, 3 more were gone. Reverend Elijah collapsed, blood soaking his shirt. He clutched Isaiah's hand, whispering, "You forged tools. Now forge their souls. Don't stop." Then his eyes closed forever. The group knelt, sobbing. Yet when they rose, each gaze burned brighter, carrying a piece of his spirit forward. At last, after countless nights, they reached the border of Ohio, a land without slavery. From afar, the town's lights flickered like guiding stars. The first to see it cried aloud, "We made it! We truly made it!" Naomi, tears streaming, embraced her daughter. "My child will grow up never knowing the whip." Jonas collapsed onto the ground, laughing. "I swear, I could run 1,000 more miles, so long as there's no smell of bloodhounds." Isaiah Turner stood silent, surveying the survivors. From 100, just over 70 remained. The blood, sweat, and souls of the fallen seemed to seep into the earth beneath their feet. He tightened his grip on the hammer and murmured, "This is not the end. But it is proof. We have walked farther than chains ever allowed." The Ohio border appeared like a faint streak of light through the morning mist. The group froze, no one daring to take another step, as if one wrong move would turn it all into a dream. But when the first rays of sunlight struck a flag hanging from a nearby house, no slave emblem, no whip by the door, they knew this was the land of freedom. The first to weep was Naomi Clark. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her daughter to her chest. "My child will grow up never knowing the whip," she sobbed. The little girl looked around, puzzled, unsure if her mother cried from fear or joy, then burst out giggling. That small laugh echoed in the stillness, and it brought tears to every eye. Jonas Wright dropped to the ground, threw his head back, and laughed loudly. "Lord, I've never breathed air so sweet. If freedom has a smell, it's the wind this morning." Someone teased, Maybe it's just your sweat." The group erupted in laughter, laughter that shattered months of silence. They were led to a northern church. The doors were wide open, the bells ringing, not to summon overseers, but to welcome them. Reverend Elijah was gone, but his memory filled the room. They sat in the pews, listening to the hymn of freedom rising. Many sang through tears, their trembling voices still strong. Free at last, free at last. A small feast awaited, not grand, just soft bread, hot soup, and bright red apples. Yet to them, it was a banquet from heaven. Naomi bit into an apple, juice spilling down her chin, and cried, "Never did I dream I'd taste something this sweet without stealing it." Children raced around the churchyard, laughing, playing escape games. But this time, no hounds or whips chased them. A mother watched, resting her head on a friend's shoulder, whispering, "If this is a dream, I never want to wake." Isaiah Turner stood quietly on the porch, the hammer still in his hand. A northerner approached, saying, "You can set that down now. You won't need it here." Isaiah smiled and shook his head. "This hammer isn't just for striking. It reminds me that freedom was forged from blood and iron. I'll keep it." To tell the children, Jonas, bandaging the scars on his back, joked, "If Turner opens a forge here, he'll be the busiest man alive. Everyone will want a freedom hammer." Isaiah laughed, deep, rare, but warm. That night, they slept in beds without chains beside them for the first time. Some couldn't sleep, tossing restlessly, too accustomed to the crack of whips and barking hounds. In the silence, an old woman whispered, "It's so quiet. I don't know whether to fear or rejoice." Someone answered, "Then sing, so we remember we're still alive." And so soft singing drifted through the dark, lulling them into their first free sleep. The next morning they gathered before the church, where northerners photographed them with an old camera. The image was blurred, light bleeding into shadows, but every head was held high. Proof they had escaped. They were free. Naomi cradled her daughter, eyes shining at the lens. Jonas grinned wide beside her, raising his arm as if to defy the world. Isaiah sat at the center, hand resting on the hammer. In his eyes was not only joy, but a vow. Their story was not finished, for the first taste of freedom was only the beginning. Years after that night on the Yazoo River, the name Isaiah Turner was no longer just that of a blacksmith from Cane Hollow. It became legend, whispered in secret gatherings, woven into the songs women hummed while washing clothes by the river, reflected in the eyes of children as they traced the scars on their parents' backs. In Ohio, Isaiah opened a small forge. It was no longer a place under an overseer's watchful eye, no chains hanging from the beams. There he taught children how to hold a hammer, how to sharpen a blade, not to break shackles, but to build houses, to shape hoes and plowshares. Yet every time his hammer struck the anvil, he murmured, "Each blow is a reminder. Freedom is never given. It is forged." Naomi Clark became the community's storyteller. Each evening, she gathered the children and told them of the long night at Cane Hollow. Not to plant hatred, but to teach that even when driven to the edge, people could still choose to stand tall. Her daughter grew up never knowing the taste of the whip, yet she could recount every detail of the tale as if she herself had lived it. Jonas Wright, the quick-footed boy with a scarred back, grew into a lively man with a sharp tongue. He often joked, "If I survived whips, hounds, and swamps, nobody can call me coward." People called him the Eyes of the Escape, a symbol of vigilance and wit. Years later, when the Civil War ended, the survivors gathered once more. Beneath a great oak tree on the Ohio shore, they raised a simple stone marker, engraved with the words, "Here 100 souls dared to dream. They entered in chains, but walked out in freedom. Some fell, but all prevailed." Isaiah Turner passed away in peace, the old hammer still in his hand. Before closing his eyes, he looked at Naomi and Jonas and whispered, "Keep forging, not with steel, but with memory." His funeral had no trumpets, no drums, only the ring of hammers on anvils. Each member of the community held a small hammer and struck 3 times. The sound rose together, a hymn of iron, a farewell to the blacksmith of freedom. From that day on, each year, at the first full moon of June, the community gathered beneath the oak, retelling the story. Children sat in a circle, their eyes shining as they heard of the river crossing, of the Yazoo mud, of the hounds howling in the dark. And when the story ended, the elders always added, "And that is why we live here, free." Someone once asked, if Isaiah were still alive, would he be proud? Naomi only smiled, her gaze distant. He doesn't need pride. He forged us so that we could be proud ourselves. Isaiah's legacy was not bound to stone markers or a modest forge. It lived in every hand that gripped a hammer without trembling, in every child's laugh untainted by fear of the lash, in every story carried across generations. One day a boy stood before the community's new forge and asked, "Why do we always strike the hammer 3 times before we work?" An elder replied, "Because that is the heartbeat of freedom, the rhythm Isaiah left for us." And so the hammer blows echoed through the years. No more whips, no more overseers, no more swamps to swallow their steps. Only fire, steel, and memory. As the wind swept across the fields of Ohio, the rustling seemed to whisper, "We fell so that you could stand. We died in chains so that you could live in freedom." Isaiah Turner, the blacksmith of Cane Hollow, had passed on, but the flame he lit still burns. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If you've listened this far, you've surely felt the sweat, the blood, and the unshakable faith these men and women left behind. They did not fight only for their own freedom, but to send a message across time. Freedom is a fire that must be kept alive. And your support, every view, every share, every comment, is part of keeping that fire alive. If today's story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, so we know this journey meant something to you. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell, so you won't miss the stories yet to come. Histories retold with passion, stories both tragic and inspiring. Every subscription is more than a number. It's a message. I believe in the power of memory. We'll see you again on the next journey.